Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Kyo Kim. In just a few days, President-elect Joe Biden is set to be sworn in. And Biden announced new additions to his foreign policy and national security team who'd bring decades of diplomatic experience to the new administration. Meanwhile, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un vowed once again to build up the military force and nuclear arms. In a military parade to celebrate the end of a party congress, North Korea showed off what seems to be a new submarine-launched ballistic missile. Today, we'll discuss these and more. Joining us is Gary Samore. He's professor of the practice of politics at Brandeis University. Dr. Samore served in the U.S. government for over 20 years in a number of positions, including the role of a White House coordinator for arms control and weapons of mass destruction. Jenny Town also joins us today. Ms. Town is a fellow at Stimson Center and the deputy director of Stimson's 38 North, a website that provides policy and technical analysis on North Korea. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden is just a few days away, and it seems like we are getting an overall picture of Biden's diplomatic and security team. From Secretary of State nominee Antony Blinken, National Security Advisor designate Jake Sullivan, and CIA Director nominee William Burns to Kurt Campbell, who was picked as White House Indo-Pacific Coordinator. What do you find particularly distinctive in Biden's team, Dr. Samore?
Well, this is really an excellent team. They're very professional and experienced. I think they'll work together quite well. So I think you'll see a return to normal, coherent American foreign policy, unlike the Trump foreign policy. And I think the entire team is really committed to trying to repair relations with allies and restore cooperation and confidence in the United States.
And Ms. Town?
I would agree with Gary. This is an impressive group of people, and it's great to have people in these positions that have the experience that they do, and hopefully bring back some optimism that we can actually multitask as a government again. I'm still very interested to see who they will put in charge of the North Korea issue, and who that North Korea team will be to really understand what their potential policy towards North Korea is really going to be. My biggest concerns, though, are if we go back to a too traditional of approach, that it may not be compelling to the North Koreans. I think there's a certain level now of having tried traditional, having tried untraditional, and neither got any outcomes that were tangible for the North Koreans. And I think it's going to take a little bit more forward-leaning policy to get the North Koreans back to the table and to really signal to them that different outcomes are possible. In this political climate with such polarization, and with this having been such a high-profile issue for the Trump administration, I'm just a little concerned of how much political space their North Korea team will really have, and how willing they are to shoulder the criticism that's going to come with basically any choice that they make.
Well, I agree with Jenny that there's North Korea fatigue in Washington because the United States has tried so many different approaches over several decades, and all of them have failed. North Korea has developed nuclear weapons, continues to improve that capability, and nobody realistically thinks nuclear disarmament is achievable in the near term. So I think the Biden team will have to figure out how to construct an approach toward North Korea that's realistic and achieves at least some objectives toward limiting North Korea's nuclear and missile activities in exchange for sanctions relief and security assurances and so forth. As Jenny says, that's a traditional approach. Whether it will be more successful this time than it was in the past, we don't know. But I do think North Korea's economic problems makes it at least more likely that there can be some modest success in diplomacy, because Kim Jong-un clearly has to focus his attention on trying to overcome damage done by sanctions and natural disaster, and of course the coronavirus pandemic.
Let's just step aside a little bit and talk about Kurt Campbell's role as a White House Indo-Pacific coordinator. This is a newly created position in the White House. What is the significance of this, Dr. Samore?
So in the National Security Council structure, the main organizational units are called directorates, and they're headed by senior directors. So the coordinator position, which was created when I was in the White House, is an effort to bring together several different directorates under one senior official. So for example, when I was the White House coordinator, I had two directorates reporting to me, one for nonproliferation, one for arms control. And in the case of Kurt Campbell, they've created a new directorate, a new coordinator for Indo-Pacific. So Kurt will be responsible for at least two directorates, South Asia and East Asia. And I think the focus of his effort will be to coordinate U.S. policy and strategy toward China. And of course, that includes all of Asia. So I think from a bureaucratic standpoint, it makes sense to have somebody in the position as a coordinator Asia.
And when it comes to North Korea, things are quite different from what they were during the Obama period. North Korea's nuclear threat has become more serious than ever. Will the Biden team's approach towards North Korea be different from the Obama team's? Ms. Town first.
I presume it will be. Biden isn't Obama. And the people he's put together, certainly, again, they do have a lot of experience. And they've seen what's happened over the past 4 years. I think they will be pro-diplomacy at the beginning, but again, more disciplined, trying to take it back to a more traditional approach to diplomacy, trying to actually do the hard work of negotiating. And rather than jumping into these made-for-TV summits and trying to get the publicity for work that they haven't done. But I think there's a couple of problems here that I see arising, and that is on the North Korean side, there's also a different team. So in the past, we were always dealing with Ri Young-ho, Chae Sun-hee, who had a lot of experience with the Americans and were very pro-diplomacy on their side, even if the negotiations themselves were still hard. Those people are now out of those positions, and we have a new foreign minister in North Korea who is a harder line as well. And so it will be a much more difficult proposition as the Biden administration tries to create a more disciplined approach.
And Dr. Samore, of course, you have a first-hand experience during the Obama administration. What is your view on this?
The Biden administration is more likely to return to a traditional diplomatic approach, trying to negotiate an agreement among experts and high-level officials, which can pave the way for a summit, rather than going straight to a summit, which was the Trump approach. I think the interesting question is, first of all, what kind of team does the Biden administration put in place? I hope they appoint a senior official with primary responsibility for North Korean negotiations, because I think the job requires a full-time senior official. And the other big question, of course, is whether Kim Jong-un is prepared to go along with such negotiations. After the failure of the Hanoi summit, the Trump administration made repeated efforts under Steve Biegun to begin a traditional negotiation process, and North Korea rejected all of those overtures. So the question now is whether Kim Jong-un's economic situation leads him to accept a proposal by the United States to begin negotiations in an effort to achieve some economic incentives in exchange for nuclear and missile limits. And we won't know the answer to that until the Biden administration actually makes a proposal to begin such negotiations.
Mm-hmm. And recently, North Korea concluded its party congress. Its leader, Kim Jong-un, said the regime plans to bolster the nuclear war deterrent and build more powerful military capabilities. And not stopping there, North Korea showcased a new type of submarine-launched ballistic missile during a military parade right after the party congress. How should we take Kim Jong-un's message, Dr. Samore?
So North Korea wants to make sure that its nuclear forces are protected against conventional attacks from the United States and South Korea. If there was ever a war on the Korean Peninsula, the US and the ROK would, of course, try to destroy North Korean nuclear forces and missiles before they could be launched. So one of the ways in which countries try to achieve secure nuclear forces is with a sea-based nuclear deterrent. In other words, missiles launched by submarines. So we know North Korea has been working on a sea-based nuclear deterrent for many years. I think they're a long way away, probably decades away from having a credible sea-based deterrent in terms of submarines that can travel long distances and submarine-launched missiles that have a long range. But I think we can expect that North Korea will continue to work on improving their submarine-based missile force. And the parade supposedly displayed a version of earlier submarine-launched missiles that may have a slightly longer range. Of course, we won't know what actual capabilities are unless North Korea tests them.
Ms. Tang, what do you think Kim Jong-un's message was? I mean, showing off an Slbm, isn't North Korea clearly pressuring the US ahead of Biden's inauguration?
I think oftentimes we ascribe too much to this notion that North Korea does things around the US. I think there is a bit of a message here that says, North Korea is not waiting around for the US to change its mind or to come and get an agreement. I think in the meantime, they're showing that they are moving forward and advancing in their capabilities. These are directions that are consistent with what we've seen over the years, programs that we know that they have been developing and developing further. And I think we'll continue to see this if you look at the sort of wish list of things that Kim Jong-un announced during the Party Congress as their WMD goals. A lot of these are very consistent with other trends in weapons development in China and Russia, even in South Korea, talking about nuclear submarines. So I think there's a bit of them trying to show their domestic audience that they're strong, that they have that they're in line with other world leaders as well in their military capabilities, or are trying to be in line with other world leaders in terms of their military and defense capabilities as well. And again, the idea that they're not waiting around for approval or for the U.S. to change its mind or to concede on things in order to stop them. Yes, it creates more leverage for them in negotiations.
And Kim Jong-un said the key to establishing a new relationship with the U.S. is whether the U.S. drops its hostile policy towards North Korea. Is Kim Jong-un saying the ball is in the United States court, or is he saying he's willing to negotiate with the U.S. over denuclearization? Dr. Samore first.
So the most important part of Kim Jong-un's statements during the Party Congress is what he didn't say. He didn't threaten to resume nuclear and long-range missile testing. In other words, for the time being, it appears that he will continue to adhere to the moratorium on testing that he agreed to with Trump. So that at least creates an opening, an opportunity for the Biden administration to propose negotiations without having an immediate confrontation over testing. And I think the ball is in the Biden administration's court. Once it gets in office, once the senior officials have been appointed and confirmed, I think the Biden administration needs to signal to North Korea that it's prepared to resume negotiations on the basis of the Singapore summit communique. And then we'll have to wait and see whether Kim Jong-un is prepared to accept that offer.
And Ms. Tan, what do you make of what Kim Jong-un said?
I think it's also important to look at the way that he portrayed the history of the summits was very positive. And he did also, this formulation that the key to U.S. DPRK relations is the removal of U.S. hostile policy. This is a consistent talking point that he's had over the years, and especially since the Hanoi summit. In order to move things forward, there are measures that the U.S. needs to take to sort of live up to their side of the bargain. I think, some of the messaging that was about the U.S. itself echoes what he said before in the party Congress, in the party plenum last year, this notion that they have declining confidence that a different relationship is really possible with the U.S. And I do think that puts a lot of onus on the U.S. to try and demonstrate and to take actions that do show that a different relationship is possible and different outcomes are possible, not just the offer of more negotiations.
And North Korea has endorsed the leader Kim Jong-un as the general secretary of the ruling Workers' Party. But when we look at North Korea, the economy is still hurting badly. Why the endorsement when Kim Jong-un doesn't seem to have achieved that much? Dr. Seymour?
Well, I think the endorsement is because Kim Jong-un wanted to be endorsed. Obviously, anybody who would object would not survive very long in Pyongyang. They would be dead or in a prison camp. But I do think Kim Jong-un's emphasis on the failures of the economy shows us that this is a very important priority for Kim Jong-un. And again, that may create a diplomatic opening for the US and the ROK to offer economic cooperation, assistance, sanctions relief in exchange for limits on North Korea's nuclear and missile program. So I'm optimistic that Kim Jong-un is at least prepared to begin a diplomatic process. I don't know that it will produce very significant results, but at least for the time being, it doesn't appear that he's going to confront the Biden administration with an immediate confrontation through a resumption of testing.
Ms. Tao, how serious is Kim Jong-un about improving the economy? What was most notable among what he said about the economy during the party congress?
Well, I think he's very serious. This is a high-level goal for him, and I think he's staked a lot of his own political legacy on being able to bring prosperity to North Korea, not just survival. He spent the beginning of his career as the leader trying to build expectations that prosperity was possible. And so over the past couple of years now, or since the failure of Hanoi, he's now had to try and tamp down those expectations, taking back the statement, saying things like, we may have to tighten our belts again. And so he has been sending the messages that these are tough times, that expectations should be lowered in the near future. I think a lot of the messages in what we learned from the economic plan really are reverting back to a lot of government control in some areas where there had been some level of autonomy in the past, which is not the most positive sign.
And when we look back at the events during the Trump administration, South Korea had often volunteered to play the role as an intermediary between the US and North Korea. As the Biden administration is expected to take rather a traditional diplomatic path, will there be any room for South Korea to play a similar role, Ms. Tao?
Well, I think, South Korea played a mediating role at the beginning of the diplomatic process, but less so towards the end, once the US and DPRK had direct channels to each other. Part of the problem has been that, with South Korea unable to move forward on the inter-Korean agenda, it really creates a credibility gap for Moon in that process, where there's very little confidence, I think, on the North Korean side that the South Koreans can bring something to the table without US cooperation. So unfortunately, I don't think there's much of a mediating role in this process, but I do think the South Koreans will be instrumental in keeping the US focused on this issue and making sure that it is a priority and it doesn't get dismissed.
And Dr. Seymour, will South Korea's role now be reduced or changed?
There's not much role for South Korea when the US and North Korea have a direct channels of communication, and in particular when they're meeting, whether it's at the summit level or whether there's negotiations among senior officials. But I also think Jenny's right. There's a danger that the Biden administration, which is confronting so many other issues, both domestic and foreign, and because the North Korea problem seems so intractable and frustrating, there is a danger that they will downplay North Korea, that they will ignore North Korea as an issue. And of course, unfortunately, if you don't do something to manage the North Korea problem, it can explode in your face. So I do think it's important for the ROK to continue to lobby Washington for giving the North Korean issue enough attention so that the problem can be at least managed.
Well, ahead of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration, North Korea showed its intention to pressure the incoming U.S. government. Uncertainty still remains as concerns are rising over what North Korea will do next to get President-elect Joe Biden's attention. Dr. Seymore and Ms. Town, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Young-Yo.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.